Okay, so this video is going to be about pivot tables. And to understand what pivot tables are for, we'll be talking about a couple of other functions. We'll talk about a function sum and sum ifs, right? So first of all, let's see what we have, right? So we have some data here. So we have some transaction data, and we have the date of our transaction. We have the person who sold the product. We have which state it was sold in, what brand of product it was, how much the sale was for, and how much was the cost for that product. Very basic. So, but we have a lot of data, so we don't have a few records. If I press Control arrow key down right now, it'll jump all the way down. We'll see that we have 20,000 records. So it says row 20,001, and one is for the label on top. So we have 20,000 records. So first of all, let's talk about sum and sum ifs functions, right? So I'm going to navigate to this tab first. Let's talk about sum and sum ifs functions. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to insert some rows on top here because I want to put my calculations on top of this data. Now I've just entered one row, and now I'm gonna have to go here and insert another, and I need a little more space, so I have to keep repeating this thing, and it's really not comfortable going here, right clicking and inserting every time. So I'm gonna press F4 at this point, and this is gonna be repeating the last thing I did. So I'm going to press it a few times. I have 5 rows. I think that's going to be enough. So I'm going to start with my sum function. I'm going to label things. So I'm going to call this sum and sum ifs. So this is going to be our sum function. This is going to be our sum ifs function. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by totaling up all the sales to see how much total sales we have. So equals, that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with sum. So I want to sum up starting from here, which is in the back, and I can't really click where I want to start. And we have a lot of data, so it's not going to be very easy to just select with our mouse going 20,000 records down. So this is what I'm going to do. Because this is being blocked, so I could technically close this and click on it, but because it's being blocked, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually use my arrow keys on my keyboard. So I'm going to press arrow key down, so it moves one down from the current cell that I'm in. I'm going to keep pressing down until I hit the first sales number we have here. Now that's F7. Now what I want to do, I want to select from here all the way down. So the way I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to press Control Shift and arrow key down. So there it is. I've highlighted all the sales numbers there. And what I'm going to do is close my parentheses at this point, hit enter, and that should tell us how much that is. So we got this number, almost like 5 million. Now let's talk about sum ifs function. So what we did, we just summed up all of the sales numbers. That's what we did. Now what I'm trying to do this time, let's say I want to sum up only the numbers that are New Balance brand, right? We have one New Balance here, like this one. We have another one here, and so on. So we do not want to include Adidas or any other brands in our total. So how could we accomplish that? We could use a function called sum ifs. So I'm going to start with my equal sign, and I'm going to type again. So to make this a little more pleasant experience, I'm sorry. So I'm going to go and see what my range is. So that's from F7 to 20,006. Great. So that's from the 7th row to 20,006th row. So I'm going to try equals sum ifs. So there is also a function called sum if. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use sum ifs right now. So that's sum ifs. The first things for our sum ifs is the sum range, which is the same range of numbers we were just summing up, right? So it was from F, I just forgot, so I'm gonna, I guess, repeat this. So I'm gonna scroll down, that's F7, and I guess we'll do Control Shift arrow key down to highlight all of those numbers. Now usually it's a good practice to lock this range right here, which I'm going to do by pressing F4. Now in this particular case, since I'm doing one calculation, doesn't really matter. But if I was planning to copy this formula down and maybe get some other nice calculations going, I would definitely need to lock this. So I'm gonna hit comma here, and the next thing is criteria range. So this is the numbers. Sum range is the numbers we're summing. Right now the criteria range is going to be, again, the range. The name range is the key. So when it says sum range, it means it's a range of numbers, not one number, right? So the criteria range is the range of values where we're going to be checking for what it is that we want. Now, what we said, we want to see if it's a new balance or not. Now, new balance appears in this range of numbers in this E column. So I'm going to type that range in. So it's going to be from E7. It's going to be the same size range from F7. This is going to be E column, E7 to E20,006. That's what we have. So that's that column. So I'm going to press F4 immediately after this to lock that range too, comma. And now we're going to say, so what's the criteria? So we want to know in that range that we've highlighted for criteria range, what do we want to pick? We said what we wanted was new balance. So I'm going to use quotes here because it's going to be text. So I'm going to type new balance and close the quotes. Now, you can see there are more arguments here, but they're in square brackets, which means it's optional. We're going to get to those. But for now, I'm going to just close this parentheses and hit enter. And what we should see is the total just for new balance right now in that particular cell. Now, usually this is not a very good way of doing things to hard code the actual new balance value in the cell like the way I did. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually cut and paste this sum ifs over here, and over there I'm going to type new balance. And what I'll do, I'll go inside of my formula instead of just hard coding new balance right there. I'm going to exclude that, and here that's E3 cell. So I'm going to type E3 to attach to this new balance cell. I'm going to hit enter, and that should give us the same number. Now the difference is that I can now go here and change the brand, and the number should update, which it does. So I'm going to switch this back to new balance, and that should give us our new balance total. That was great. Now we also saw there were some other arguments. Now, in addition to just having like new balance total, now let's say we wanted to know just the ones that are new balance, but we also want to check that that occurred in a particular region. So we want to see in Midwestern region how much of New Balance brand of product we sold, right? Not just New Balance brand of product. So this is where these other sum ifs conditions come in. So the first thing I'm going to do, again, to not hard code things in my formulas, I'm going to type Midwestern right here, Midwestern right there. So I guess I'm gonna copy this formatting down, click on the format painter, click Midwestern so it looks similar there. So right now I want to update this, or maybe I'll keep this the way it is, and I'll call this sum ifs two conditions. We'll just make another formula. And a lot of this second formula is going to be very similar to the first one, to this one. So we already know our range is from the 7th row to 20,006. So I'm going to go ahead and type equals sum ifs. So the sum range is going to be the numbers we're trying to sum up. So again, that's going to be from F7 colon F20,006. I'm gonna hit F4 to lock that range, comma. Now the next thing is criteria range. So we still want to make sure it's the brand New Balance, which means our first criteria range is going to be from E7 colon E to 20,006. And again, hit F4 to lock that as well. Looks good, comma. Now in this range, we want to make sure it's New Balance. So I'm going to go ahead and type E3, which is where the text New Balance is. So we're checking in this range whether it's New Balance or not, which is in each cell. Now this is what we had last time. This was our last formula. Now what I'm going to do, just keep going. So I'm going to hit comma here. So after the comma, now we have our criteria range 2. Now our criteria range 2, we said we're going to check our regions. Basically, we want to see if it's Midwestern or not. So our regions is, that's A, B, C, this is D, so in our C column. So I'm going to go from C7 colon C 20,006, and again F4 to lock that. So there we have it. So I'm gonna hit comma again, and then we want to get the criteria in this range. So in this range, we're going to check whether it's Midwestern or not, and our Midwestern is in our E4 cell. So I could just click on it, but sometimes I just prefer to type it because I feel like it's more error prone, but doesn't matter, whatever is comfortable for you. So at this point, I'm going to close my parentheses. Now the cool thing about sum is function, if I had a third criteria, so maybe I wanted to check if it's one of the salespeople or not, I could keep going by hitting another comma, another criteria range, another criteria, and so on. But in this case, I don't need that. I'm just going to close my parentheses, hit enter, and that should be our number. So that's our New Balance in our Midwestern region, right? So if I go ahead and update any one of these two, so I'm gonna go and type Adidas. There we have it. And now let's pick, and both numbers, if you pay attention, update, right? Now it's Adidas in Midwestern. Now let's say we want to do Western. So this shouldn't be case sensitive, so we should be able to just type Western in lowercase. And there it is. That's our Adidas Western number. So that's our sum ifs function and our sum function, at least basically introduction to sum ifs. Let's put it this way, because you know, when you get to like dates, there are some additional things you can learn about it. But that should do for our example. So now let's think about our pivot tables. Why are we talking about these functions? So let's think about a situation. What I need to do, I need to create a report. And I want to know how much of each brand of product I sold. So what I need to do, see, I have this Adidas, which is this number. So I'll need to just create a report that's going to say, well, for Adidas, we sold this much product, right? So I'm going to paste values only here because it's a formula. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pick the next brand. I'm just going to copy paste it, and that should update. So now again, do values only here so it keeps the formatting. I'm going to copy this and do paste special and values only. And now I have to keep doing this for each one of these brands until I get the total for each one of them. So if we have a lot of brands, this could take a long time. Now the second problem that I'm going to have is that I could want something a little different. Not only could I want the brand total, I could also want to know how much I sold of this brand in each one of possible regions. So I would have to go and first type the brand, one of the brands, at least the first one, and then I'll have to go through all the options of the regions and get the new total. So I would start with, let's say, Midwestern, and get this total 244,000, etc. And then I would grab the next one, get the total, and so on. Keep going until I get the total for each one of those. Now, this is where you can use a pivot table. Pivot tables will do this really fast and will get all those totals to you right away without spending a lot of time doing what I'm just describing. So let's do this using a pivot table. Now, again, you don't have to do any of what we just did to make a pivot table. So I'm going to move to this transactions tab, first of all, and this is a copy, a duplicate of the data we had. So what I'm going to do is create a pivot table and get that report that I was just talking about using a pivot table. So it's a very good idea to make sure you have labels for each one of your columns, because it's going to make a lot easier for you to make your pivot tables, so you'll know which column represents what. So a lot of times, if your labels are not very easy to understand to explain what a column is about, maybe you should rename them, right? Don't leave them blank. Try to put something in. So that's the first thing. Now, let's go ahead and make our pivot table. So another thing you probably want to check in your pivot tables, you want to make sure you don't have any blank rows in your pivot table. So you don't have any rows that are blank like this in the middle, right? So you can actually, I'm gonna do my undo to get back, which is your Control Z or Command Z. And I'm going to press Control arrow key down at this point. So Control arrow key down, it looks for the next separation of a blank cell and a filled in cell. If I had a blank, it would have stopped somewhere in the middle. It didn't. I went all the way down. That means I'm good. There are no blank rows in this particular data. I'm fine. I can go ahead and make my pivot table. So what I'm going to do is click inside of my data. Doesn't matter where, just make sure you're inside of your data. You're not clicked over here, not clicked over there, right? And you're not like this selected. Just one single cell inside of your data is fine. At this point, I'm going to click on Data tab on top, and I'm going to just select Pivot Table right there. So I'm going to click Pivot Table, and what's going to happen? Google Sheets is going to make a whole new tab. It's not going to touch my data. It's not going to modify my data. So if I go back to my data, you'll see my data is the same thing as it was. Now it made this new tab. It named it Pivot Table 7. We can obviously rename this to make this better. So I'm going to, I guess, call this Summary right now. And it's going to place this tool on this, and it shows what's the range of data it's using for this particular analysis. So the first thing you have to do when you build a pivot table, well, you don't have to, but if you want to make sure that every time you build a pivot table, it works the right way, you want to figure out what's your values field first, which is right here. So when you think about pivot table values, you want to think about, see, remember when I was talking about this sum ifs example, what was I summing up? I was summing up the sales, which was our sum range, right? I was summing up all of the sales number. Now I could also sum up cost of goods, which would be another option for us to sum up. So anything that we can sum up, in this case, whatever we're summing or whatever we're applying our function, because sometimes we could count or get an average of it. But right now, let's talk about summing. So we're trying to sum up the sales. So that means our values field is going to be that field, which is sales. So I'm going to move back to my summary tab where my pivot table is. I'm going to click on this add field under values, and I'm going to use sales because that's what I was trying to sum up. And you can see it says summarized by sum. It already picked the function sum. We're good with that. We want to use that. That's good. Now the next thing we want to do, if you remember, I said I wanted to go through each one of these options for different brands and see what the total was. Now again, I want to see what's the label for that, and the label is brand, right? So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna pick rows. The reason I'm gonna pick rows, when I was creating this particular example of what I'm trying to accomplish, I went row by row. So I put Adidas in the first row, then I went for the next brand, I put it in the second row. So because we want to move this way down, I'm going to pick rows as my next option. So I'm going to go to my summary, I'm going to go add field under rows, and I'm going to choose brand. And just like that, we have our totals. So each brand, we have the total for each brand. So it's very good. Now, the second thing I said we wanted to do, we wanted to also not only figure out how much we sold of each brand, we wanted to know how much of that brand we sold in each region, right? So that's our region. So great. Now we could just remove this field. So if we're just trying to do regions only, obviously we can just add a field instead of adding a brand. We could do region, and what it's going to show us is, because we still have values as our sales, it's going to sum up our sales and we'll get our total in each region. But what we also want to do, we want to also add our second breakdown. We want to see both. So I'm going to add another field to rows again, and I'm going to use this time the brand. And right now what's going to happen, you'll see how we have each region broken down by each brand, and we get the total for each one of those. Then we get the total for the region, and so on. And we get all our breakdown and our entire data. Now, the reason right now we have our region broken down by the brand is because in the list of our fields inside of rows, the first one on top is region and the second one is brand. Now you could change this. So if I just move the brand above region, I'm going to get the opposite breakdown. I'm going to get each brand broken down by each region, as we have right here. So we have each brand by each region. So that's great. Now, usually in this particular case, we probably would want this. Makes a little more sense, or at least easier to read, but it will vary from case to case. You're gonna have to know what you want to get as a report. But now let's talk about columns. So columns do exactly the same thing as rows. They're just going to the right instead of going row by row, right? And a lot of times utilizing columns is a great idea when you have more than one field, like we have right now. So we have one region and one brand. We're breaking it down by. So you could use columns to make this report more readable. And a lot of times what I do, I pick wherever I have less options. So for example, under region, we only had like 5, I believe, regions. With brands, we have a lot of options here. So wherever I have less options, I put it under columns. So I'm going to pick region, and I'm going to drag and drop it under columns. And sometimes, because this is a web interface, it could kind of be a little tricky, but that should work. So right now we have kind of the same report in this crosstab layout. Now the region is under columns, and our rows is our brands, so we can see what the total is for each region right here in our nicely laid out pivot table. So far so good. Now another thing we may want to do is get also the average instead of getting the sum, right? We may want to know what's our average sale in each one of this. So we can just go here under our values. Instead of using the sum function, we can change to any other function, which could be, for example, our average. So if we change to our average, we'll get our average sale. Now, a nice feature in pivot tables in Google Sheets that's not available in Excel is the median calculation, which is great if you like doing any statistical analysis. You may want to use that sometimes. And again, I'm not going to go into the differences between median and average in this particular video. But again, we can choose our functions. So we have count and counta. So count will just count numbers. Counta will count text and numbers. So in this particular case, it's not going to matter because, well, we have numbers in our sales column only. So now that's going to tell us how many sales we had. So we know we had 1,031 transactions in Midwestern region that were selling Adidas brand of product, right? So switching back to sum, which is our sum of sales. That's good. Now we could add an additional field here. So I'm going to add another sales, which is the same field I had before. And the reason you could want to do this if you wanted to have sum and, for example, average side by side. So I can still keep one of this as sum, and I can switch one of this as average. And you can keep adding more as the same field and changing the functions. So if we wanted to get the average and the count and all of those, you could do that. I'm going to X out of this. We'll just keep 1, which is going to be our sales numbers. So far so good. So now we have our nicely laid out pivot table. So far we've used values, we've used columns, we've used rows. Now there's also this filter option in pivot tables. So what is that for? Now what filter option is going to allow us to do is to filter our report. So let's say we so far selected Midwestern and we selected brand. That's the current report we have, right? But what if we wanted to look at this report the same way as it looks right now on a screen, but we want to know just for one of our salespeople, what are the numbers, right? So what we could do, we could just use our salespeople in our filters. So I'm going to go under filters, and that's called sales rep. That's our label for the column. So that's going to add our label. So right now you see it says all items. I'm going to go ahead and click in this box, and now we have the names of all our salespeople. So I'm going to click clear to unselect all here. That's great. So now we can just pick one of our salespeople, whoever that person is going to be. Hit OK. And that should filter to just that salesperson. And because that salesperson didn't have any sales in those other regions, we're just getting this single region for that particular salesperson. Now you could also select a few different people if you wanted the total for a few different people, and you would get the total, and that's our filter. Okay, so far we did some analysis and we were able to get some great numbers, but we want to take this a little further, right? So we have the dates of our transactions. Now, a possible way we could want to analyze this data, we could want to know how much we sold each year, right? So we have some sales that are in 2015, some sales that are in 2016, some of them are in 2017. We want to know how much sales we did in each one of those years. Or we may want to know how much sales we did in the first month of that year, the second month, month to month sort of analysis. Now, at this point of time, Google Sheets does not include option for grouping dates, unlike a feature that's available, for example, in Excel. So if you're used to using that in Excel, that's not going to be available in Google Sheets. Now, what we'll have to do, we'll have to use some additional functions to accommodate that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my data and I'm going to add a couple of columns. The first column I'm going to add is going to be the year, and the second column I'm going to add is going to be the month. So I'll go ahead and give the same formatting here. Click on the Format Painter, choose these two columns. Now I want to get the year here as a column. I'm going to start with equals year as the function that I'm going to use. I'm going to click on the date and close the parentheses, hit enter, and that should tell me what year that is. So it extracted the year out of this date. Great. So what I'm going to do is go to this corner and double click to copy this formula down. So it takes a little bit because we have a lot of records. And then in a similar way, I'm going to use our month function, and I'll click on the date, close the parentheses, and we can see it's the 5th month, which is going to be our May. Again, double click to send this down. Now, for those of you who don't like the month as an index, which I tend to like, you can also do month name. So again, I'm going to format this the same. So to do this, I'm going to use text function in Google Sheets. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to click on the date. And the next thing is going to be the format I want that date in. So I'm going to use quotes because it has to be as text format. And what I want is the month. So I'm going to do MMMM as the full month name. So I'll close my parentheses, hit enter. That should tell us what month it is. So double click to send it down. See, May, January, and so on. So we're able to get all of those. So again, when I do this double click, I always do at some point control arrow key down to make sure that it actually worked all the way down. In this particular case, it seems like we're completely fine. We have our year, month, and the name of our month. So now, because we have these new columns, we should be able to do our analysis by year, by month, and so on. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I go to my summary, you'll see that my data still goes from A1 to G 20,001. Now we did add a couple of columns, H, I, and J, so we'll have to modify the range of data we're using for this particular pivot table. So I'm going to go back here, click on this edit range, and the last column was J, so I'll update that, hit OK, and that should update the data we're going to use. Now I'm going to take everything out of rows and columns for now. So we just have, again, the same thing. We're starting with our values. We want to sum up the sales, which is already here. So in our rows, I'm going to first use year. And there it is. We have our total for 2015, 2016, and 2017. Now I can also add another field, and it's going to be our month. So now it's going to be our year broken down by months. And again, if we wanted to have a nice cross-tab report where we can compare month to month sort of thing, because year has less options, I'm going to move year under columns. And again, this is a little tricky with this web interface, but it should work. So there it is. Now we can see we have a partial 2017 here, and we can compare month to month and our totals. And there we have it. That's our nicely laid down report in our pivot table. So pivot tables are great tools to analyze detailed data. A lot of times if you export data from a system, they could come in handy to analyze it and get some nice reports. In this particular rows, we have this option to show totals, so we can obviously disable that, and you see how the totals for the month all the way down, which is in this case the total for the column, will disappear, and we can check that, and that should come back. There we have it. In the same fashion, we can also disable that, which is going to be our row total. It's kind of confusing because you're turning off the totals for the column, but it's deleting the row totals on the right. It's not a big deal, so it's easy to deal with, right? Now we can also sort our data by these fields. So right now we can see how it's sorted from the first month to the last month, and 2015 through 2017. Now if you wanted to do this, you can do descending sort, so from 2017 to 2015, and put this back. Another interesting thing is that you can change what you're sorting by. So right now we're sorting by the name of the month right here, from the lowest value to the highest value. So I can change this to sort by to sum of sales. So now I'm going to decide, do I want to sort it by the grand total, or I want to sort by the values here or the values here. So which one do I want to sort? So I'll go by the grand total. And then now what we have is sorted by grand total here. We have the lowest value on top, the highest value all the way down, because it's in ascending order. So we can just switch this to descending to have the highest value on top here. So you can do all types of sorting. In this particular case, because we want kind of month to month report, we probably wouldn't do this. So I'm going to switch the sort by month and switch this to ascending to get our totals. All right, so that's a little introduction to pivot tables, and we'll talk about pivot tables in detail later on, about some extra functionalities and calculated fields we can add, but that's it for now.